Welcome back to Inside the Philippines. Before we start, a quick word about this one, because it isn't the story you're expecting. Our man today is Bern, 52 years old, Norwegian, from Haugesund on the west coast, though he spent most of his working life out of Stavanger. 22 years on North Sea oil platforms, roustabout, then derrickman. Helicopter out on a Tuesday, 2 weeks on the rig, 4 weeks off, over and over, until the years stopped having names. He's a big man, quiet, the kind who says 3 words where most of us would use 40. He came to the Philippines for 14 days. He had a return ticket. He had a modest amount of money in the bank, and no particular plan beyond seeing whether the sun was as cheap as his old shipmate claimed. That was 7 years ago. He's still there. Now, I want to be clear about something up front, because it shapes everything that follows. There is no villain in this story. Nobody stole from Björn. There's no fake profile, no vanished girlfriend, no second boyfriend in Germany sending money to the same Gcash number. If you came here for a scam story, this isn't one, and that's exactly why it's worth your time. What happened to Björn is quieter than a scam, and in my opinion, it's a good deal more dangerous, because it can happen to a careful man. It happened to a careful man. There's a number that comes up near the end of this. When you hear it, you'll understand why he can't get on a plane. Everything before that number is just arithmetic, done one reasonable month at a time. This one's going to stick with you. Here's his story, in his own words. My English is not so good, so you must be patient with me. People tell me it is fine. I don't believe them, but okay. I will start with the rigs, because that is where I come from, and I don't know how to explain the rest without it. 22 years offshore. I started at 24 on the Statfjord field, roustabout, which means you are the one who carries things and gets shouted at. Later, derrickman, 2 weeks on, 4 weeks off. You fly out from Sola on a Tuesday morning in a helicopter that smells like rubber and men's breakfast, and for 14 days you live in a steel box in the middle of the sea. Then you come home. That is the part nobody understands about the rig life. Not the work. The coming home. Because you have 4 weeks with nothing. Everyone else is at their job. Your friends, they have families. They have Saturdays. You have Wednesday afternoon in an apartment in Stavanger that smells like it has not been used. Because it has not been used. You clean it. You go to the gym. You watch football. You wait to go back to the box. I was married once, briefly, in my 20s. It was not dramatic. She simply got tired of being alone in a flat she paid half of, and I could not argue with her about that because she was correct. So, 22 years, and the whole time I have this idea in my head that I am building towards something? Not a house, I mean a thing. My own thing. Since I am maybe 26 years old, I have this in my mind, that one day I will not fly out on Tuesdays anymore. I will have a yard. In 2014 I did it. Marine supply and repair, outside Stavanger, close to the water. Hydraulics, welding, deck fittings, servicing small vessels. My name on the sign. My actual name, painted, which I know sounds stupid, but I would drive past it in the evening sometimes just to look. 3 employees. Good men. One of them, Rune, had worked with me offshore. And it bled. From the first year it bled. Not dramatically. That's the thing. Nothing collapsed. It was slow. Oil price fell in 2015 and 2016. And when oil falls in Norway, everything falls with it. And suddenly, the boats I service are not being serviced. They are being sold. I put in my own money. Then I put in more. Then I borrowed against the flat, which is the moment where a sensible man stops. And I want to be honest with you. I knew it was the moment. I knew, and I did it anyway, Because by then, stopping would have meant admitting the whole idea was wrong. And I had been carrying the idea for 18 years. 4 years of that. It closed in 2018. The bank took the yard, took the boat, a little Nordkap I had since 2009, took the apartment. I was 44 years old, and what I had left was a private pension scheme I could not properly touch, a small partial payout that meant nothing, and the state pension waiting for me at 62 like a bus. I would have to stand in the rain for another 18 years. Here I must explain something about Norway, and I want to say it carefully, because I am not bitter about my country. Norway is a good country. It looks after people, but it does not know what to do with a man who has failed at something he chose. Nobody was cruel to me. Nobody said one bad word. That is not how we do it. What happens is you are simply, gently, over about a year, removed from the conversation. The invitations stop. Not all at once. First the ones where money is involved, the ski trip, the boat weekend, then the dinners. Then people are very warm when they see you at the Kiwi, and they do not ask you anything specific. And you understand you have become a thing people feel slightly awkward about. I took a room in Sandnes, 14,000 kroner a month, which is maybe $1,200, for a room. One room, shared kitchen, a landlord who was perfectly nice. And I would sit in this room, 45 years old, and do arithmetic. That is what I did in the evenings. Arithmetic. How many months until the money is gone? Which was, roughly, everything I had left divided by a number that was too big. I did some work, a bit of welding, some casual repair, cash, nothing that came to anything. The rigs had moved on, and I could have gone back offshore, maybe, at 45, but I did not have it in me to fly out on a Tuesday again and admit that the 18 years had been a detour. I want to be clear that nothing terrible happened to me. Nobody died. I was not sick. I had food. This is what I mean when I say I do not know how to explain it properly in English. It was not tragedy. It was just that I had stopped being of any use to anyone, and I could feel that every single day, in a room I could not afford, in a country where I could not afford to be poor. Then, in the autumn of 2018, my phone made a noise. Kjell, a mudlogger I worked with maybe 8-9 years, back on the Gullfax, retired, gone to somewhere I had never heard of, Dumagete. We had not spoken in 3 years. No message, just a photo. A plate of food and a beer on a plastic table, and behind it, the sea. And underneath he had written what it cost. 90 kroner. I sat in that room in Sandnes, and I looked at that photograph for a long time. Kjell. I should explain Kjell, because without him, I am still in that room. We worked together maybe 8 or 9 years, on and off, mostly Gullfax. He was a mudlogger, which on a rig is the man who sits in a little cabin looking at what comes up out of the hole and tells everybody what it means. Small man. Talked constantly. The opposite of me, which is probably why it worked. He retired in 2015, and I heard from somebody that he had gone to Asia, and I thought, okay, that is a thing men do. And then I did not think about it again. And then, in October, November 2018, this photograph. No message with it, just the picture. A plate, some grilled pork, rice, a small dish of something with vinegar, and a bottle of San Miguel with the sweat running down it. Plastic table, behind it the water. And underneath he wrote the price in kroner, because he knew that is the only part one would look at. 90 kroner. Now, I want to explain what that does to a man in my situation, because if you have never been broke in a rich country, you will not understand it. My room in Sandnes was 14,000 kroner a month. That is around $1,300 for a room, shared kitchen, a window that looked at another building, a landlord called Terje, who was perfectly decent, and who I avoided in the hallway because I was 2 weeks late twice. So I sat there and I did arithmetic, which, as I told you, is what I did in the evenings anyway. And the arithmetic said that what I paid to be humiliated for 1 month in Norway would buy me 3 months of something else. Maybe 4. That is all it was in the beginning. Not a dream, not paradise. Just a number that was smaller than the other number. I messaged Kjell and asked him practical things. Rent, food, doctors, internet. He answered everything. And this is important. He never once tried to sell it to me. He told me about the power cuts. He told me about the heat, that the heat is not a temperature, it is a weight. He said, come and look, and if you hate it, you go home. It costs you a plane ticket. Why not Thailand? People ask me this. I looked at Thailand, of course, but how do I say this without insulting anybody? Thailand felt to me like a place men go to be embarrassing. That is my own prejudice, I know it. I have since met perfectly normal men who live there very quietly. But at that time, I had just spent 4 years failing in front of everybody I knew, and I did not have any embarrassment left to spend. I wanted somewhere I could be nobody. And the Philippines had one thing Thailand did not, which is that everybody speaks English. My English is not good. I did not want to also be stupid. Bohol, because it was cheap in November. That is the entire reason. I looked at flights, and Bohol was cheap in November. Oslo to Manila via Doha, then a domestic hop to Tagbilaran. 7,900 kroner return, which was a lot of money for me then, and is a comedy amount of money for me now. 2 weeks. Return ticket booked, hotel guest house booked for 11 nights. The last 3 I left open because I thought maybe I would go to another island. I told nobody, except my sister and Lisa, and I undersold it. I said I was taking a cheap holiday because November in Rogaland is a punishment. She said, good, you need sun. She did not ask any other questions, which at the time I was grateful for, and which I now think about differently. I landed in Manila, and I understood immediately that I had been living in a very quiet country. Tagbilaran Airport, then a tricycle. This is the thing with the sidecar bolted onto a motorbike, and I am 102 kilos and about 1.90 meters, so getting into a trike is a negotiation. The driver found this extremely funny. We went along the coast road to Loe, maybe 40 minutes, and the whole way I have my knees around my ears, diesel smell, dogs, the sea flashing between houses, a basketball court every 400 meters with men playing in flip-flops. And the heat. Kjell was right about the heat. It is not a temperature. It sits on you. The first 3 days were not good. I want to say that clearly, because in these stories the man always arrives and is instantly reborn. I was not reborn. I was bored. I got badly sunburnt on the 2nd day because I am from Haugesund, and I am basically a vegetable that grew in a cellar. I ate at the same carinderia twice a day because I did not know where else to go. And I was very aware that I was a large silent foreigner taking up space, that people looked at me and saw a Kano, which is the word here for a Westerner, and that the word comes with an assumption about your wallet attached to it. I did not talk to anybody for 3 days except to order food. Then, day 4, I had the laundry problem. Because a man on holiday for 2 weeks does not think about laundry. And in that heat, you go through 2 shirts a day, and the guest house had a bucket and a line, and I am not going to stand there washing shirts in a bucket. 2 doors down there was a place. A concrete room open to the street. 2 machines, a plastic chair, a fan that turned its head slowly like it was watching for something. Sign said, "Wash and fold. 45 pesos per kilo, which is maybe 8 kroner. The woman running it was Marilu, 38, small. Hair tied back, a Manila Water t-shirt that I later learned belonged to a cousin who had never worked for Manila Water. She weighed my bag, wrote in a notebook, told me a price. I paid it. Fine. The following week I brought another bag, and she looked at the notebook and said she had made a mistake the first time. She had charged me for 8 kilos, and it was 6. She gave me back the difference, 90 pesos, less than 2 kroner. Here is what I want you to understand. I had not noticed. I would never have noticed. Nobody would ever have known. I did not think, this is a good woman. My life is changing. I thought, data point. That is how I am. 22 years reading gauges. You do not react to one reading. You file it and you watch for a pattern. So I filed it. Nothing happened romantically in those 2 weeks. Nothing at all. And if anybody wants a story where something happens in the first 2 weeks, this is the wrong one. What happened was that I started sitting in the plastic chair. Because there was a fan, and there was shade, and she did not mind. And over maybe 10 days, she became the only person on that island who talked to me like I was a person and not a wallet with legs. She had opinions. She corrected my English without making anything of it. Her English was better than mine, and she never once pretended otherwise, which I respected enormously. She was eldest of 6. She told me that early, the way you would tell someone your job. And on maybe the 8th day she asked me what I actually do all day. Not what do you do for work. What do you do all day? I sat in that chair with the fan going past my face every 4 seconds, and I could not answer her. Because the honest answer was arithmetic, in a room, in Sandnes. I extended the ticket by 3 weeks. Cost me about 4,000 kroner to change it. I told myself it was the exchange rate. 3 weeks became 5. 5 became... Well, I stopped announcing the extensions to myself. I want to be very careful in this part, because this is the part where people listening will already be shaking their heads. Here it comes, they think. Here is where she starts asking. She did not ask. Not for 4 months. And I am going to lay this out properly, because everything after depends on it being true. And it is true. The first time I offered was maybe week 6. Her machine broke. The older of the 2 washers, the drum bearing, had gone. You could hear it from the road. She was doing everything by hand for 4 days, in that heat, with her arms in a plastic basin from 6 in the morning. Repair was going to be around 4,000 pesos, $72. Nothing. Less than a night out in Stavanger. And I mean genuinely less. I offered. She said no. Not shy no. Not the no that means ask again. She said, if I take money from you now, then we are a different thing, and I don't want to be that thing. And then she went back to the basin. She fixed it herself 11 days later out of her own money. And when I said something about how she could have just let me pay, she made a face, like I had suggested something slightly unclean. I offered twice more that spring. Once for her phone, once when a typhoon warning came through and she wanted to get the machines up off the floor. Both times? No. 4 months. That is not nothing. That is a woman turning down free money from a large, idle foreigner, repeatedly, while working 12-hour days. And I have thought about it 1,000 times since, and I still cannot make it into a strategy. If it was a strategy, it was the longest and least efficient one in the history of the world. And here is the other thing. She warned me. I had not asked. I had not brought up anything about other women, other foreigners, any of it. But one evening, I remember it was raining, that rain that comes down like somebody emptying a bucket, and the whole street smelled of hot dust getting wet. She just started telling me about a girl 2 barangays over who had 3 men sending money, about a Belgian in Panglao who built a house and then found out about the boyfriend. She told me the mechanics of it. Gcash, the sick mother messages, how you can tell. She said, if you are going to stay here, you should know how it works. 7 years later, people tell me that was the smartest move she could have made. Inoculate the man, make him trust you. I have turned that over and over, and I still don't believe it. I think she was just a person telling another person the truth about the place he was standing in. If you want to call me naive for that, fine. I have been called worse, and by better. Month 4, she took me to the family. Barangay outside Loe, maybe 20 minutes inland on a habal-habal, which is a motorcycle taxi. And again, 102 kilos on the back of a small Honda on a road, with more hole than road. The driver was about 19 and completely fearless. The house was nipa, and plywood, and corrugated sheet, up on blocks, chickens under it. Basketball hoop nailed to a coconut tree with no net. Somebody's karaoke going from 2 houses down. Air supply, I think. It is always air supply. And it kept going the entire afternoon. Her mother cried when she saw me. Just immediately, straight away, before a word. I did not know what to do with that. In Norway, if a woman cries when she meets you, it means something has gone badly wrong. Marilu said afterwards it was because her mother had been praying about it. That is not a figure of speech here. People mean it. The father did not cry. The father looked at me for about 4 seconds, and then he walked around the side of the house and came back with a bucket of tools and pointed at the water pump. No preamble. No how was your flight. Just pump. Broken. It was a shallow well hand pump, a Jetmatic, the cast iron kind you see everywhere, and the plunger seal was gone, and somebody had previously repaired the linkage with wire, badly. I sat in the dirt in the sun for 3 hours with a wrench and a tin of grease and a piece of inner tube for a gasket. And I want to tell you honestly what that was like, and I am not good at this part. Since 2018, one had not been useful to one single human being. Not one. Not to a customer. Not to an employer. Not to a wife. Not to a friend. I had been a problem people were polite about, and this old man in a barangay in Bohol, who did not know one thing about me, took one look and decided I was a man who could fix a pump. He was right. I fixed the pump. When the water came, he said the only English sentence I ever heard him say. He said, "Okay, you stay for lunch." That is it. That is the whole sentence. We had lunch. Rice, a fish somebody's cousin had caught, and adobo. And the mother kept putting more on my plate in a way that could not be argued with. 6 children. Marilu is the eldest. There was a brother, 16, in his school uniform because he had come straight from class. 2 sisters. A grandmother in the corner who I do not think ever established who I was. And this is where I understood what I was actually looking at, so let me explain it the way it was explained to me, because I think most of you will get it wrong, the same way I would have gotten it wrong. Marilu had been carrying that household since she was 19. 19. She worked in Cebu for years, sent money home every month, came back when the father's back went. The laundry was hers, built from nothing. Everything in that house that was not the walls, she had bought. There is a phrase, utang na loob. People translate it as debt of gratitude. And then Westerners hear debt and think manipulation. It is not that. It is closer to the structure that holds the roof up. You are not a person alone who happens to have relatives. You are a load-bearing part of a thing, and it is bearing on you. And one day, you will bear on it. And what happened that afternoon, with the pump and the lunch, and the mother putting fish on my plate, was that I was being invited to stand inside it. That is an honor. I want to be clear that I still think it was an honor. It is also, and I did not think this at the time, an unlimited liability. 2 weeks after that, I started giving 18,000 pesos a month toward the house, about $320, around 3,400 kroner. Not asked for. I raised it. Marilu argued about the amount. Downward, she wanted 12. And we settled at 18. And here is my arithmetic, which I did in bed one night, and which I would like you to check, because it is correct. 14,000 kroner a month for a room in Sandnes where nobody came and nothing happened. 3,400 kroner a month to be part of a family with a pump I had fixed myself. I remember thinking, quite calmly, that this was the best deal I had ever been offered in my life. That was December 2019. In January, I flew to Cebu and back for a visa run and thought nothing of it. And in February, I was making plans to go home in the summer, look at some work, maybe see about a contract with one of the service companies again. That was the actual plan. I want that on the record. In February 2019, I had a plan, and it involved Norway. Then March came. I do not need to explain March 2020 to anybody, but I will tell you what it looked like from a barangay in Bohol, because it was not like Europe. They shut the island. Completely. Checkpoints on the coast road with barangay men, in vests and clipboards, 1 quarantine pass per household, and if your name was not on the pass, you did not go to the market. Curfew. The tricycles stopped. The ferries stopped. Cebu Pacific canceled everything and then canceled the cancellations. And I was in a guest house in Loe, paying 12,000 pesos a month, about $220, for a room I could not leave, in a town where I knew exactly one person well. So I moved into the compound. It was Marilu's idea, and it was obviously correct. The house had space, more or less, and it made no sense for me to be paying rent for a box, while everybody else was 3 kilometers away. I put my 2 bags on the back of the habal, and that was the move. 2 bags. I want you to notice how small that was. A man relocates his entire life, and it fits on the back of a motorbike, and nobody has to sign anything. And here is where it stops being a holiday. And I did not notice the moment it happened. Because when you live in the house, you are not supplementing anymore. You are feeding it. 18,000 a month was pocket money for a family that was buying its own rice. When the sisters lost their jobs, one was working at a resort in Panglao, gone overnight. The other was in a call center in Tagbilaran that cut everybody. 18,000 became the household income. The whole thing. 9 people at that point, counting the grandmother and a cousin who came from Ubay and never really left. Nobody sat me down about it. The rice sack got bigger, and I paid for it. I raised it to 25, then 30,000 a month by the end of 2020. About $540, around 5,700 kroner. Still less than my room in Sandnes. I kept doing that comparison. I did it constantly, like a man pressing a bruise. The visa. This is the part one want the young ones to hear. Tourist visa here you can extend and extend, up to almost 3 years without leaving. And during the pandemic, the Bureau of Immigration was very good about it, honestly. Their office in Tagbilaran, near the port, plastic chairs, a fan, a number system. Every 2 months, I would go in with my passport and about 4,500 pesos and come out with another sticker. Every 2 months. Then it becomes every 2 months automatically. Then it is just a thing you do, like buying gas. And that is when I stopped counting time in trips and started counting it in extensions. Nobody warns you about that. There is no moment where a man in a uniform says, "Sir, you are now a resident of nowhere." It is just stamps. In the autumn of 2020, the tuition came up. Marilu's brother, Jomar, the one who had been 16 in the school uniform. He had finished senior high, and there was a course at a state college in Tagbilaran, marine transportation, which if he finished it, puts him on ships. 42,000 pesos a year with the fees and the books, and the boat fare. About $760. 8,000 kroner. Nobody asked me. What happened was, one evening after we ate, the family had the conversation about it in front of me. In Bisaya, mostly, but with enough English scattered through it that I got the shape, and with everyone's eyes very carefully not on me the entire time. How much it was. Whether he could work instead. Whether the mother's brother in Manila could be asked. I said I would pay it. They were surprised, or performed surprise, and I have never been able to decide which. And I have stopped needing to decide. Because both things get you to the same place. I paid it that year and every year after. 4 years. He is on a container ship now, out of Singapore. He sends money home. I am not going to pretend that does not mean something to me. Then the roof. The typhoon season of 2020 came through, and the nipa and plywood at the back of the house came off in strips, and the mother had buckets out in 3 rooms, and Marilu said very calmly that it would not survive another season, which was true. Anybody could see it was true. Concrete posts, hollow block, steel purlins, corrugated sheet. Proper. Done by a local crew. 3 of them. 6 weeks, because materials kept not arriving. 185,000 pesos. $3,300. Around 35,000 kroner. Now, I knew. I want to be extremely clear that I knew. Chell had told me, on the phone from Dumaguete, in the tone of a man who has said it before. A foreigner cannot own land in the Philippines. Not through a wife, not through a girlfriend, not through anything except a corporation with Filipino majority owners, which is complicated and expensive and mostly a way to lose the money slower. The house sat on land titled to Marilu's mother. I was putting 35,000 kroner of concrete onto a piece of ground I would never have 1 legal centimeter of. The Facebook groups told me too. The expat groups are full of men shouting this at each other in capital letters. I read them. I knew. I did it anyway. And I am not going to give you a clever reason, because there wasn't one. It was the first thing I had built since the yard. That is the whole reason. A man who used to have his name on a sign spent 4 years being nothing, and here was concrete going up that would still be standing in 30 years. And I stood in the yard one afternoon in February 2021 with the rain coming down hard on the new sheet and everybody inside dry, and I was happy, straight out, no qualification. Happiest I had been since maybe 2015. I do not take that back either. Whatever else is in this story, that afternoon was real. Now the part 1, like less. Marilu has a daughter. She was 14 when I met her. She is 21 now. She is at nursing school in Tagbilaran, and she is a good kid. I have never known who her father is. Not once, in 7 years, has that man been named in my presence. Not in an argument, not at Christmas, not by the grandmother, not by anybody. He is simply not a subject. And I never asked. I told myself that was respect. That was the word I used in my head. Respect. It is her business. We do not do that in my family either. Leave it. I think now it was not respect. I think I was afraid of the answer. And more than that, I think I had already learned that in that house you do not ask about the thing everybody is not saying. Which was fine, in that one case. But it became the way I did everything. For 7 years I lived in a house where the important information traveled around me instead of through me, and I called it good manners. Meanwhile, Norway got further away every month. My sister, Anne-Lise, called at Christmas, 2020, and asked when I was coming back. Not accusing, she was just asking, the way you ask about a bus. I said something about flights, about how nothing was moving, about how it made no sense to travel yet. All of that was true. Every word of it was true. It was also not an answer, and she knew it, and she let it go. And I let her let it go. In April 2021, I emailed Terje in Sandnes and gave up the room. 14,000 kroner a month for a place I had not been inside in 2.5 years. He had my things in 3 boxes in his basement, and I told him to keep what he wanted and throw out the rest. I felt nothing but relief. 14,000 kroner a month saved. That was the last address I had in Norway. The father got sick in the spring of 2022. He had been diabetic for years, which everybody knew and nobody treated properly. Because treating it properly costs money every month forever, and there is always something more urgent this month. Then his legs swelled, and he could not sleep lying down. And they took him to the provincial hospital in Tagbilaran, and it was the kidneys. Dialysis. 3 times a week, at a center near the hospital, 4 hours a session. I need to explain the money on this one because people outside do not understand how it works here. PhilHealth, the national insurance, does cover dialysis sessions, a certain number per year, and that part is genuinely good. What it does not cover is everything else. The erythropoietin injections, the iron, the maintenance drugs, the transport, 3 times a week, 40 minutes each way, for a man who cannot sit up on a habal. The food while you wait. The extra sessions when the numbers are bad. Once you add all of it up, the household was looking at about 11,000 pesos a week. Call it $200, around 2,000 kroner, every week. Now, here is the part one most want you to hear, and it is the part that people always get wrong when I tell this in a bar. Nobody asked me. Not once. Not Marilu, not the mother, not the sisters, not the brother. In 3 months of that, nobody said the word money to me in connection with the father. What happened instead was that the conversation stopped when I walked in. That is all. I would come in from the yard, from whatever I had been fixing, and there would be 4 of them at the table with the calculator app open on somebody's phone, and by the time I had my sandals off, they would be talking about something else. The mother would get up to get me coffee. Very warm, very normal. And I would sit there and know that I had just walked into the middle of it. 22 years, I read gauges for a living. You do not need somebody to tell you the pressure is dropping. The needle tells you. And silence in that house was a needle. There is a thing here about asking. Direct asking is shameful. If you must ask a foreigner for money, you have already lost something, and everybody in the room loses it with you. So you do not ask. You simply arrange the situation so that the man can offer, and then he has given freely, and nobody's face is on the floor. I want to be very careful about this because I can hear how it sounds. It sounds like a technique. And in some houses, with some families, it absolutely is a technique. And there are men watching this who have been worked like a pump handle by exactly that silence. But it is also just how it is done. It was how they talked to each other, not only to me. When the mother needed something from the father, she did not ask him either. So, was I manipulated? I think the honest answer is that a culture which cannot ask directly met a man who had decided he needed to be needed, and neither side had to do anything clever at all. We just fit together like two parts off the same shelf. I went with them to the nephrologist in June. Marilu did the talking, and the doctor answered her in Bisaya. And he had a printed sheet, and he went down it line by line with a pen. The sessions, the EPO, the 2 medicines, the monthly bloods, and I did not understand one word of it. I watched her face instead. She kept nodding. She kept her voice completely level. And she was doing the arithmetic behind her eyes the whole time, the same arithmetic I used to do in a room in Sandnes. And when it was finished, she said, "Thank you very much, doctor." And we went out into that car park where the heat comes up off the concrete at you, and she said, "We will manage it." I said, "No, I will pay for it." That was me. Nobody prompted it. I said it in the car park before we even got to the tricycle. 9 months. He died in March of 2023, at home, which was what he wanted. I had been to the center with him maybe 30 times by then, sitting in a plastic chair reading nothing, the machine going, the aircon in that place always set to about 14 degrees, so all of us in jackets in the tropics. He never said much to me. He was not a talkative man in any language, and I was not a talkative man in his. But he would put his hand flat on my forearm when we got back in the trike, every time, and that was the conversation. I did not add the total up until 2025, about 430,000 pesos, $7,700, around 80,000 kroner. I do not regret 1 peso of that, not one. If you take nothing else from this story, take that. The dialysis is not the mistake in it. Now, the other thing that happened in 2023, which was much quieter, and which is actually what this story is about, I sat down to sort out my Norwegian affairs. It was after the funeral. I thought, okay, I am 50 now, I should look at what I have and what is waiting for me. And I could not really find myself. You have to understand, Norway runs on the folk register, the national registry, and everything hangs off your registered address. When you have been out of the country long enough, you get registered as emigrated. And I had been out since November 2018 with no address in Norway since April 2021. Membership of the National Insurance Scheme, Folketrygden, normally stops after 12 months abroad. So no fastledge, no doctor, no coverage. I could apply for things back, but applying is a process, and processes need an address, and an address needs money up front. Then the pension. I had always carried a number in my head from the yard years and the rig years, a number that was going to be waiting for me at 62. When I actually looked at it properly, it was smaller. Considerably. Because the years since 2019 are empty. No employer, no contributions, nothing going in, and because I had been assuming a version of my life where I kept working until 60. So, no address, no coverage, no employer since 2019, no contributions since 2019. A pension that had quietly shrunk while I was not looking at it. And here is the thing I finally understood, sitting there with the fan on, and a bad connection, and the roosters going, because in Bohol the roosters do not wait for morning. They go all night like they are being paid. You cannot be poor in Norway. I do not mean it is shameful. I mean it is not financially possible. A room is 14,000 kroner. A deposit is 3 months. Before you have eaten anything or bought a coat, you need something like 60, 70,000 kroner just to stand still for 90 days. And I did not have anywhere near that in a form I could get to. The door I had been picturing behind me, the one where, if it all goes wrong, I go home. It was not there, and it had not been there for a long time. I did not hear it close. There is no sound. You just turn around one day, 4 years later, and check. I did not tell anybody. Not Marilu, not my sister. I closed the laptop and went and welded a gate for a Swiss man in Panglao for 4,000 pesos. That was the other thing keeping the whole arrangement up, by the way, and I should have said it earlier. I worked. Cash, repairs, welding, pumps, generators, mostly for other foreigners along that coast. 25 or 30,000 pesos in a good month. No work permit, of course. You need one here for any employment at all, and I did not have one, and neither does anybody else doing what I was doing. I knew that was a risk. I filed it. Then in 2024, the middle sister wanted to open a sari-sari store off the front of the house. Shelves, a chest freezer, the first stock, the little grill window. 60,000 pesos. About $1,080. I said yes, without really thinking about it. By then, saying yes was just something I did, like buying gas. It ran 11 months and closed. Not stolen, not wasted. The neighbors buy on credit. That is how it works. A peso at a time in a notebook. And you cannot say no to a neighbor. So the stock walks out of the shop, and the notebook fills up. And one day, there is no stock and no money, and a very full notebook. Most of them go that way. I do not blame her for 1 minute of it. I just did not notice, at the time, that I had stopped asking myself where the 60,000 came from. In May of 2025, Kjell had a stroke in Dumaguete and died in the hospital there 4 days later. I found out from his daughter on Messenger in English, very polite. She asked if I wanted anything of his. I said no. I did not go to the funeral. It is 1 ferry and 1 bus, and it would have cost maybe 3,000 pesos, and I told myself it was because of the visa timing, and that was a lie. And I knew it was a lie at the time. He was the only other Norwegian on that coast. Not a close friend exactly. We did not talk about anything. But once a month or so he would call and we would speak Norwegian for 40 minutes about nothing. About the price of diesel. About a man we both knew from Gulfax who had gone into politics. And afterwards I would feel like myself for a while. After May 2025, there was nobody I could do that with. And I did not notice how much that mattered until it was gone. Which is a very stupid thing for a 51-year-old man to have to learn. Now, I want to be extremely clear about what happens next, because everybody watching this is waiting for it, and it does not come. There was no phone. I never looked at her phone. There were no messages. There was no other man. There was no German sending money to the same Gcash number. There was no confession. There was nobody's cousin taking me aside at a fiesta to tell me the truth. Nothing was ever hidden from me except one man's name. And that man has nothing to do with this. What happened was arithmetic. On a Tuesday. It was August. I had been in Tagbilaran for a job. Replacing a bilge pump on a Swiss man's boat, 4,500 pesos, good work. And I was sitting outside a Jollibee near the port waiting for the rain to stop, because when it rains there, the whole street turns into a river in about 90 seconds. I had a Coke. I remember the Coke because they had run out of ice, and I opened the banking app to check that his transfer had landed. That is all I was doing. The signal was bad. It took maybe a minute to load. $6,100 and something. I sat and looked at it. Then I closed it and opened it again. Because that is what a man does. Now let me take you through it, because I have done this many times since, and I want you to see that not one of these was a stupid decision on its own. I arrived in November 2018 with about $24,000. That was everything the bank had not taken. 7 years of household support. It started at 18,000 pesos a month, went to 30 in the pandemic when nobody in that house had any income at all, came back down to around 22 when the sisters got work again. Over 7 years, somewhere north of 2 million pesos, but I earned a lot of that as I went. The welding, the pumps, the generators, 15,000 in a bad month and 30 in a good one. 4 years of Jomar's tuition, 168,000 pesos. The roof, 185,000. The dialysis, 430,000. The store, 60,000. Visa extensions, 7 years of them, about 27,000 pesos a year. Call it 190,000 pesos to remain a tourist in the place I lived. And the years, 2020 to 2023, when there was no work for a foreigner with no permit on a locked-down island, and the money went out and nothing came in. Roughly 1 million pesos of my savings, gone. About $18,000, over 7 years, which is around $210 a month. $210 a month. That is what it cost me. That is the whole crime. I want you to sit with that, because it is the actual lesson, and it is not a dramatic one. I did not lose my money in a night. Nobody took it. I did not gamble it. I spent it at a rate of $210 a month for 81 months on a life that was, most days, better than the one I left. And there was no month, not one, in 81 months, where I could have looked at the number and said, this month is the mistake. Then September. My extension was refused at the counter in Tagbilaran. It was nothing in the end. Something about a mismatch on the ACR I-card renewal and a date that did not agree with another date. But there is a whole ecosystem of men who solve this. They sit outside those offices, they know the officers, and the one I used wanted 8,000 pesos on top of the fees, about $145. I paid it. Of course I paid it. What is the alternative? Deportation and a blacklist. But 8,000 pesos in September 2025 was not what 8,000 pesos had been in 2019. It was 3 weeks of rice. That was the week I priced a ticket. Manila to Oslo, one way, mid-January, around 50,000 pesos. $900. I could have found that. The flight was never the problem. 90 days in Norway is the problem. A room outside Stavanger, 10 to 14,000 kroner a month, and they want 3 months deposit before you get a key. You need an address before you can register. You need to be registered before the doctor exists. I worked it out 4 or 5 times, on paper, and the number was never below about 70,000 kroner. $6,300 in a country where I have no employer, no contributions since 2019, and a body that has done 22 years offshore and is now 52. 6,100 in the account. 70,000 kroner needed on the ground. I was $200 short of being able to go home and start again from absolutely nothing. I told Marilu in October, in the kitchen in the evening, and the neighbors' karaoke was going, and I remember it was that Air Supply 1 again, the same one, 7 years later. I said the number out loud. She did not ask me to repeat it. She did not ask how. She put her hands flat on the table, and she started crying. And the thing that took the ground out from under me was not the crying. It was that she was not surprised. She had known. Not the exact figure, but she had known for a year, maybe longer. She had watched me take the small jobs, watched me stop replacing my sandals, watched me go quiet about the visa fees, and she had said nothing for a year, because to say it would have meant naming that we had failed, and you do not do that in that house. You do not put a person's face on the floor. I said, "You should have told me you knew," and she said, "You should have told me you were finished." Both of us correct. Both of us silent for a year for exactly the same reason, in two different languages. She offered to go back to Cebu. Housekeeping at one of the hotels, live in, send money home. She is 45 now. I said no. I said it hard, and I am not sure I had the right to. Here is what I understood, sitting there. She loves me. I have no doubt about that, and I have had 7 years to find some. She also spent me. She spent me the way you spend an OFW brother in Dubai. Not cruelly, not even consciously, because that is simply what a resource in the family is for. And I had spent 4 years in Norway desperate to be a resource for somebody. Both things are true. Only a Westerner needs them to be two separate sentences. And I was no longer a provider in that house. I was the ninth mouth.